views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
Hello, this is Patty Hunter. Welcome to my TV show, Patty's Page. Today, here in our home studio, is Mr. Christopher Elliott. Hello, Christopher.
Hello,
welcome.
Patty.
Oh, what a grip. Oh, it's okay. A former history teacher who is soon to be a teacher of social studies. And where would that be?
New Haven High School.
All right. You are also, Chris, an author of several books. We have them here. Wow. 2 of them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Gonna be more?
Eventually.
Yes, ma'am. Wow. Chris, you had recently written a book called Before the Dream. Let's talk a little bit of that, when it was released and why you wrote it.
Okay. Before the Dream was released in July of 2021, and the book focuses on Martin Luther King's visit to Fort Wayne in 1963, and I also parallel and expand in the civil rights movement, both local and national.
Wow. How long did it take you to write that?
Reading, research, revisions, I'd say start to finish took about 9 months.
Wow, then it gave birth wow, that was a good book. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Yes. Recently, you have written another novel. Is it nonfiction or fiction?
Nonfiction.
And what is this called?
This book is called Hornet's Nest, and this focuses on unrest in Charlottesville, Virginia during the summer of 2017.
Wow, it's just recent. About 6 years ago.
That's correct.
Oh my. Exactly. It's called The Hornet's Nest. Something really must have happened in those days. What happened?
It's centered on the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, which is what we see on the cover of the book. I actually took that photograph myself. Robert E. Lee, famous Confederate general during the Civil War, and this statue has stood in the middle of downtown Charlottesville for over a century. And it sits perched on top of a hill, looking down over the rest of the city. That symbolism was not accidental. And there was a movement that began in 2016 to have this statue removed from the city. And what actually began that movement was an essay written by a high school student, a black female student who learned the history of the statue, and of course after already learning about the Confederacy, why the Civil War was fought, and so forth. And she wrote an essay and then eventually started a petition to have the statue removed. That's what began the entire movement.
Who did she go to get the statue to be removed?
Well, interestingly enough, the Charlottesville City Council learned of her petition and her essay. City Council investigated further. There were others in the community who brought their viewpoints forward and pushed to have the statue removed as well. City Council eventually voted, and the majority voted in favor of removing the statue. And that started a very controversial period of time because there were also many people in the community who did not want the statue to be removed.
So, what was their reasoning to not have them removed?
The reasoning was Those opposed to the removal felt this was canceling of history, erasing history. And that's where the conflict began.
And unite the race, right? I mean, unite the right.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
Unite the Right was a large rally that was going to take place in August of 2017. And it was started by a couple Charlottesville residents who had ties to white supremacy. One by the name of Jason Kessler, the other named Richard Spencer, both who are graduates of the University of Virginia, which is located in Charlottesville. And they felt strongly the statue should remain in place. They started a movement. They sought a permit from the city, which was granted, to hold a large rally in the city, proposing that the statue stay in place and not be removed. And this movement spread well beyond Charlottesville into multiple surrounding states.
Yeah.
In August of 2017, where thousands of people on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the argument, showed up and descended on Charlottesville.
I can just imagine the mess when they all convened at Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Was there a riot?
There were lots of mini riots, you might say. There was fighting in the street that took place everywhere. And it made national headlines for several days because the Charlottesville Police Department, as well as other law enforcement agencies, were severely criticized afterwards for not doing enough to prevent what seemed to be inevitable clashes. So it became a bloody struggle throughout the day. There were fights that took place all over the city, all over the downtown area.
There were casualties?
Yes, there were. There were arrests. There were dozens of people that were injured, many severely. There were some that were in critical condition in the hospital. And then the worst of the injuries came later in the day.
So I understand someone got hit
Yes.
by a car.
Yes, that's correct.
What happened?
Now, I actually have a picture of her on the back of my book. I'm not sure how well you can see it. It's a smaller picture. And that was a woman by the name of Heather Heyer. And she joined a group of protesters later in the day that was marching in this downtown pedestrian mall of Charlottesville.
Yeah.
The rally was starting to wind down at this time. People were beginning to disperse. And she was among a group of estimated at least 100 to 200 people that was marching up this hill in the pedestrian mall. And they were all supporters of the statue removal.
Oh, removal, okay.
Yes. In the meantime, there were a couple cars that were stalled in traffic up at the top of the hill.
Oh.
One was a white supremacist who had been out protesting throughout the day in favor of keeping the statue. And he is sitting in his car and presumably just seething with anger, watching all these protesters marching toward him. And he basically snapped. And he floored the engine and drove directly and deliberately into this crowd of people. Dozens were injured, broken bones, several concussions as they were knocked out of the way by his car. And this young woman, Heather Heyer, she was hit dead on and was killed almost instantly.
How old was she?
She was 32 years old.
Was that the only death that was...
That was the only fatality, yes.
Was he charged with murder?
Yes, he was. And he is serving, I believe, 3 life sentences.
Right. Oh, wow. So, what made you interested in the whole thing to do a book about it?
I would say several things. I mean, I am a historian. I'm somebody who follows current events. I'm also passionate about racial equality, so this issue spoke to me as far as that was concerned. In addition to that, it was compelling because there were so many pieces to this story. From how the movement began with the petition, the essay written by the high school student, the clashes on both sides vigorously insisting they were correct.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, President Trump was asked to issue a statement. And in his statement, he made an extremely controversial remark where he tried to equate blame on both sides. He said both sides were to blame. That did not sit well with the majority of Americans who felt that the white supremacists who came and visited were the ones who stirred up all the trouble. They were the ones who started all the antagonism that existed throughout the day. That was the belief of the majority of Americans. President Trump equated the two. That caused a great deal of outrage throughout the country, including a number of his colleagues in Congress who spoke out against him, and I'm talking even Republican colleagues. So President Trump ended up making several subsequent press conferences to try and clarify his remarks, which helped a little, but the damage was already done.
What about Biden? What did he do?
Well, interestingly enough, Biden spoke out and criticized President Trump at the time. And then when Biden, about 1 year later, announced his intention to seek the presidency, this is in 2018, in his original campaign announcement, he cited Charlottesville, what happened with Heather Heyer, the one fatality, and Trump's controversial response. So that was the very first thing that he mentioned to launch his reason for running for president.
So the world was watching what was cooking in Charlottesville.
Absolutely.
And what does the world think of it? Do you know?
What does the world think of it?
What does the world think of us?
I guess that's a difficult question to answer as far as what the world as a whole thinks of it. But I think, based on people I've interviewed and I've spoken to, there's a number of perspectives to take under consideration. And it's really the two perspectives that clashed during that time in the summer of 2017. There are some on one side of the aisle that believes statues like this, celebrating the Confederacy, celebrating white supremacy, that those should be removed all around the country, that those should be eliminated, that it's the idea we're not erasing history, but we're changing how we celebrate history.
It's symbolic.
And then there's others on the other side of the aisle who believe that is wrong, that that is erasing history, that is part of cancel culture as we hear. Excuse me. And that side is deeply opposed to the removal of statues.
So what do you think about all this, dear?
I fully support the removal of it. I am firmly on the side that believes that this is not erasing history, this is properly contextualizing history. I don't believe we should be celebrating those in history, such as General Robert E. Lee, who favored white supremacy, who supported the outright discrimination or oppression of a race of people. I believe that's deeply wrong, and we should not be celebrating those individuals.
So how about the Native Americans? Does that include not just the black people, but the Native?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%.
So here in Fort Wayne, we have Mad Anthony Wayne. What do you think we should do about that?
That's an interesting question,
That's an
and
interesting
I've had that
answer.
discussion with a number of colleagues throughout the year. There are some that believe, yes, the entire city should be renamed. That would be an incredibly ambitious undertaking.
Well, people agreed to that.
Yes.
The same like in Charlottesville, really.
Right.
Here we go.
So I don't know. It would be interesting to see how the community as a whole would react to such a proposal. I suspect most would not be in favor of it,
Of
but
course.
you never know.
They're brought up for generations thinking Fort Wayne. Originally it was Kikianga. What
That's
is that?
correct.
What does that mean in Miami?
I don't recall offhand. I would have to look that up. I'm not certain.
So, yeah. You have pictures in this Hornet's Nest book, which is heavy. How many pages you got in here, dear? Cultural Clashes in Charlottesville, Virginia, 2017.
That's correct.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. How about that young lady who did the essay? How does she feel about all that had happened because of her essay? Do you know?
She has become quite the activist. She is a University of Virginia student. I think she's close to graduating, I believe. Her name is Zahana Bryant.
It's a nice name.
And she has become a prominent activist, not just in Charlottesville, but all over that area. Charlottesville is only about an hour from Washington, D.C. She's written a book. She's appeared on talk shows. She's written magazine articles. So she's made quite a name for herself.
Have you ever spoken with her?
I have not. I have not spoken to her, but I would love that opportunity.
I would love it too. See if I can get her.
Or she's a fascinating young woman.
I have to have her on Zoom and you on Zoom, so we can chat away with what's
That
going
would be great.
on. Yeah, wow, that's heavy stuff. So you have pictures in there for us?
Yes, yes, we do.
So, there you go. Small
I
picture.
have several I can share. This first one is actually a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph, and this is just moments before the car accelerated into that crowd of protesters.
So was it videotaped or just pictures?
Just pictures.
Just before the moment?
There is video though too.
I'm sure there is. That will be hard to get the video.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
These are all dark pictures, aren't they, Kim?
Yes, all black and white. This
That's
photograph
why they're
here,
dark.
that is a picture taken in front of the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. And Heather Heyer, the woman who was killed, she worked at a law firm, and she was a strong believer in racial equality.
Right.
And this is her and her boss and a group of kids taking a trip to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. a couple of years before all the protests.
Right.
This photograph over here, on the left, this is a picture of Alfred Wilson, and he is a paralegal and office manager of the law firm where Heather Heyer worked, and that's him posing with his wife, Fida. I've met and spoken with both of them on several occasions. Alfred is the one who wrote the foreword to my book.
Oh, that's a good forward.
Yes,
That
yes,
was
well written.
interesting what he wrote. That's right.
He and Fida and Heather, as well as their children, all became very close while she was employed at the firm.
Wow. Was any of civil rights leaders in this mess that had happened in Charlottesville? Tried to find
Not at the
peace?
time, but some made appearances afterwards. Like Al Sharpton, for example, made an appearance later on. Brian Stevenson is another one.
Brian Stevenson.
This here, that's a picture of Heather Heyer, and that is with Alfred Wilson's youngest daughter. And that picture was taken at the law firm where she worked.
Too bad she had to die.
Definitely.
It's a waste.
Over here, this is a photograph that was taken at a memorial that exists where Heather was killed. In this photograph here, there's Alfred Wilson. He's pictured here with his daughters, his wife Fida. And over here, this is a young woman by the name of Courtney Commander who also worked in the law firm and was a good friend of Heather's.
So did they chat about in your book all about the one that was killed? Or basically, personally, what kind of a person she was?
I cover everything in there. I cover her relationships, her whole life, relationship with her mother, how her life changed when she worked at the law firm, and then the aftermath after her untimely death.
Soon as someone dies, that changes everything. Really. I mean, it's bad enough people get injured, but to have a life taken, so.
These here are two photographs that I took, and it's a blank area, but I took these photographs for a reason. This would be on my second trip to Charlottesville in December 2021.
Oh, 2 years ago.
And this was only a few months after the statues were finally removed.
Where'd they put the statues?
They are still in storage at this point in time, and there are still discussions trying to decide what's going to happen with the statues.
They'll go put it in museums or?
Well, that's one that's been discussed. Some private individuals have offered to purchase it. There's also an offer of the idea that the statue would be melted down and turned into another sculpture. So
and
it'd be
then about
interesting
100
what final
years later,
decisions are
that'll be
made.
torn down. There's always some reason for something being torn down. Yay or nay of history, of course.
And this just shows what the town square park looks like now, absent the statue. It still looks that way today. This here is an interesting picture. Over here, that's a picture of Susan Breaux. That was Heather Heyer's mother,
Oh,
who I interviewed and spoken with numerous times, including just a few weeks ago in my most recent visit to Charlottesville.
yeah.
And she became quite the prominent activist following her daughter's death. And she appeared in news programs, TV shows, appearances all across the country for years and became a prominent and well-known activist.
Is she still
Well, she is pictured here with her husband Kim over here on the right, and in the middle that's President Biden.
Oh,
This picture was taken because early during Biden's administration there was legislation that was passed called the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. And this was passed in order to enact more severe punishments for people who commit hate crimes.
depends on what you mean hate crimes, kid.
Crimes against somebody based on their race, sexual orientation, religion, so forth.
This is, everybody has their own thoughts on that, I reckon.
This is a picture of the street here, which is now known as Heather Heyer Way. So that is just down the street from where she was killed, and the city elected to rename that in her honor less than a year after she was killed.
Is it a long road? Or
No, it's actually a very short street, but a 30-degree incline.
Wow,
And these are a couple photographs on Heather Heyer Way, which have served to be living memorials where people can take chalk and write, kind of a graffiti wall.
Yeah.
And they can write messages about hope and about unity. Gone but not forgotten is a popular phrase that's written on here. Black Lives Matter is often written on there as well.
Yeah. So, you got more? One more?
The final photograph I have is one I took, and that just shows what the downtown pedestrian mall looks like. It's similar in design to the landing that we have here in Fort Wayne, Indiana,
Oh, yeah.
but it's much larger. It stretches, I believe, like 5 miles long.
Was there a lot of buildings damaged during this ride?
No, actually not. It wasn't too bad.
Oh, thank God. But still, wowzer. So, finally, what have we learned from this and how can we find peace, finally?
I think what we have hopefully, as a society, learned from Charlottesville is that we can have disagreements. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's part of the beauty of freedom that we experience here in America. We don't have to agree on issues. We can have debates. That's fine. That's
And
even
not be
encouraged.
enemies.
But those debates should not get so contentious that they become violent, and in some cases deadly violence, what we experienced in Charlottesville. That should be unacceptable.
People are sensitive. They really are sensitive nowadays. I can't believe what's going on in this country. So, to find peace, well, without our God, we are without hope, but there is peace that the Lord has given us, and we can give that to others. So, what would you like to say to my audience about all of this that has happened? And any hope, of course.
The message I would like to give the audience is these are moments in history that I believe we can learn from. As I mentioned a moment ago, we can have disagreements in this country about issues. That's perfectly fine. That's always existed in America. That's part of the freedoms that we enjoy, these freedoms of expression, freedoms of speech, and so forth.
I hear you.
Those disagreements are perfectly fine. We're going to have them. But these disagreements cannot turn violent, where innocent lives are killed. And one group absolutely hates another group because they don't see eye to eye on an issue.
That's not right.
And that type of hatred, in my opinion, has increased over the last 8 to 10 years or so.
Anti-Semitism, anti-Native
Racism,
American.
absolutely.
don't
I
like that.
find that really disheartening, and it's my hope that that will begin to decrease again. because we should be a unified nation. We are the United States after all. And that type of unity, I think, has started to not necessarily disappear, but that type of unity has started to decrease in recent years, and that's a disturbing trend. So hopefully we can reverse that trend.
Somehow get rid of this negative death culture that we're spiraling down in. We have to get out of that. Think positive and talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk mano a mano with someone. Don't be their enemy, because you don't have to be an enemy. We humans are one race and we should get along together. Even if you get mad, but don't hit out. That's so not right.
Agreed.
So I'd like to thank you, Chris Elliott,
My pleasure.
coming on to me show. And it was a very, very good half hour we did, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Definitely. So we'll see you next week. This is Patty Hunter, Patty's Page, saying goodbye, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Godspeed, my love, until we meet again. You're always in my heart and every dream. Don't let this time apart give in to all our fears. God will keep us close from up above. So until we meet again, Godspeed, my love. God is with us always.